There. So I start by wishing everyone a good evening. I'm Dr. Cascone, Superintendent of West Orange Public Schools here. I'm very happy to be joined by some esteemed guests. I would like to start by just introducing a colleague and a collaborator of mine and ours here in West Orange Public Schools, which is Dr. Jared Scherz, the founder and CEO of Teacher Coach. I met Dr. Scherz several years back when Teacher Coach was just coming into the public education space in New Jersey, and I was immediately impressed by both Dr. Scherz's genuineness and true commitment and passion to mental health, and bringing that more directly into the space of public education. Since that time, we have partnered with Dr. Scherz on a number of initiatives. And in addition to this parent webinar series, which we're hosting the first part of tonight, Dr. Scherz is also working with the district to develop a plan of ongoing mental health supports and wellness supports for our teachers. I will allow him to introduce our guests and facilitators tonight, but I would just also welcome Carole and Jaime Bricker. We appreciate you being here tonight. And with that, I would turn it over to Dr. Scherz.
Thank you, Dr. Cascone, and welcome everybody for your first of a three-part series. I want to say just a few things before we get started. This is the introduction of the introduction. And I'd first like to express sincere and profound appreciation to Dr. Cascone and the leadership team and the board at West Orange Public Schools. As a clinical psychologist who is intently committed to supporting communities, school communities, I have found that the leadership team at West Orange is really a pioneer in education at a time where district leaders are struggling to stabilize their community and provide some continuity for the ongoing disruptions to education so that students can have a rewarding year. Dr. Cascone is one of the few leaders really throughout the country who has committed equal time and energy to the parent community, recognizing just how critical it is that everybody works collaboratively. So Dr. Cascone and I want to really acknowledge your efforts and your commitment to your community. And I hope this really is a lesson to other district leaders around the country that we have to really work in tandem with our parents and caregivers. So my next very brief message is to you folks in the community. It's 7 p.m. on a Wednesday evening. You've had perhaps a long and stressful day, but yet you are taking time out of the very large parent community here in your county. You are ensuring that your participation in the learning and education process of students is being supported by you, the most important of the team. So without the school district and without the parents working together, that it provides really fragmentation in the community, and that's going on too much around the country. So it's really imperative that parents and caregivers look at the educational leaders and frontline workers, your teachers and aides, as your collaborators, because as you work together as a team, you're going to do a much better job of supporting your students. So that is a very long thank you for you. Finally, I'd like to say a special thank you and a welcome to our absolutely wonderful presenters. You guys are in for a real treat tonight. These are two of the warmest, most thoughtful experts you're going to find. Jaime and Carole Bricker are from Canada, so you'll have to give them permission to answer questions with questions. That's something that they're likely to do. But they are well experienced personally and professionally. They've been on both sides of the table. They're going to give you some introduction of themselves, but they are just so committed to supporting you folks in the parenting community. So I will take up no more time and say thank you to the Brickers, and please all have an enjoyable webinar.
Thank you so much, Jared, for that wonderful introduction. And welcome, everyone, and good evening. We are here for Returning to Learning. But before we begin, a big thank you to West Orange Public Schools for graciously inviting us to share this evening with you. We're both really looking forward to it. And also a big thank you to Teacher Coach. Carole and myself have thoroughly enjoyed our partnership with Teacher Coach now for several years, and we really appreciate Teacher Coach's ongoing guidance and support. So once again, we are here for the first installment of a three-part webinar series under the overall umbrella and title, Returning to Learning, because we realize it has been a very challenging last couple of years for everyone, frankly, across North America. And we have found in all different school districts across North America, both Canada and in the USA, very similar issues have arisen. And these are the things we're going to address tonight. So we're looking at reigniting school communities, and that's really our key. And tonight we're going to look at connections. Now, once again, welcome. I'm Jaime Bricker, and I spent my career in our elementary school system here in the province of Ontario. And in our system, that means from JK up to grade 8. And I was both a teacher and a principal.
And I'm Carole Bricker. I'm also a retired educator and from Canada and Ontario as well. I took a little different route in my career where I focused mostly in the area of special education. I began as a special education teacher in a small class supporting students with cognitive challenges. And then towards the end of my career, I moved into a facilitator role where I was supporting district of schools to meet the needs of their students within their schools. And at that point in time, my focus predominantly was in supporting students with autism. And as well, Jaime and I are the parents of 2 adult sons. So we've looked at the educational journey through the parenting lens as well. And we've had the opportunity through Teacher Coach and other engagements to be speakers on parent engagement. And one of our roles since retirement were to become podcasters, where we really discussed over the past 4 years various aspects of education and how it affects parents and how parents can be supporting their children on their educational journey. So feel free to check out our podcast, which is Bricker by Bricker.
As we mentioned, this is the first installment of a three-part webinar series. And we kind of space them every couple of months because, as Jared mentioned, we realize everyone is certainly very busy. But we really hope you can join us for all three. In mid-January on the 18th, we'll be looking at engaging in communication. And in mid-March, on March 16th, we're bringing it all together by embracing collaboration.
And when we talk about these 3 C's, connections, communication, and collaboration, they're very much interconnected because you need to have those strong connections with your child's teacher and your child's school. And from there, it facilitates that ongoing communication that can be happening. And when you're engaged in back and forth communication, it allows you those opportunities to collaborate with your school and with your child's teacher in order to come to resolutions should any issues or concerns arise. So we really hope that you're able to join us for the 3 webinars.
All right, so why are we talking about these 3 C's, connections, communication, and collaboration kind of right now? Well, we are certainly kind of following up what was an extremely challenging year for school system in general, for teachers, parents, and certainly for kids. Now, the pandemic brought about many different things. For example, a much greater emphasis on virtual learning for our students. And there were certainly multiple transitions between in-person learning, virtual learning, and kind of back and forth, based on health initiatives, of course. And then in some classrooms, in some districts, there was kind of a hybrid model where some kids were physically in class while their classmates were learning virtually simultaneously. And of course, as parents, no doubt about it, it was a lot more challenging for the past 18 months getting in contact with either a given teacher or their overall school or principal, whatever the case may be. And of course, the reason we're focusing on establishing and reestablishing connections tonight is because there were some disconnects over the past 18 months, which were understandable. But over time, these disconnects can really lead to a breakdown in communication between families and their school.
So as we move forward with this school year, we really need to make sure that we're establishing or reestablishing, pardon me, these 3 C's, because they really have a significant collective impact on your child's school experience, their school year, and their academic success. So today, as we mentioned, we're really going to be focusing on establishing connections. So discussing ways of rekindling or reestablishing existing relationships that were maybe in place prior to the pandemic, but then also how can we go about nurturing new relationships between the home and the school. And then come January, we're going to be focusing on engaging in communication. So, how can we value and encourage and actively participate in this ongoing dialogue with our child's school and our child's teacher? And then also discussing some different strategies to use when there are situations where that communication breaks down. And then finally, in March, our webinar is going to be focusing on embracing collaboration. So really focusing and discussing ways for you to work with the school to really ensure that your child has that successful and enjoyable school year.
All right, so over the course of our webinar today, we're going to be addressing these aspects of connections. First, of course, is really getting into a bit of a definition, like what are connections? Then why are they so important? I think especially now, why are they so important? And finally, as Carole has referred to already, the importance of it, how do we establish the process of establishing and or reestablishing these important connections?
And so we'll be providing opportunities throughout the webinar for you to ask your questions. During these times, you're welcome to type a question into the chat, or as it arises, feel free to type your question into the chat and we'll address them at the question breaks. You're welcome to ask a question live, or we will also provide you with our contact information. Perhaps after the webinar, you'll think of a question and you would like to discuss that with us. So we'll provide you with our contact information then.
All right, so let's look at a definition, like what are connections? Well, the bottom line is these connections are ongoing relationships between parents and all relevant adults in the school. And I want to stress, we use the term all relevant adults because it's not simply your child or your children's teachers, but there are other adults who work with them on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And then, of course, all of the personnel in the office area. And this contact or connection is typically initiated at the beginning of the school year by the given teacher, and in some cases by, say, the principal. And hopefully, since we're well into the year, of course, hopefully that initial connection has already long since been made. Now, these relationships are greatly enhanced, however, by a regular back and forth between the home and the school. So when the school is reaching out to you, whether it be phone call, email, whatever the case may be, it's important to respond in a timely manner. And then back and forth during the year. And we call that a reciprocal relationship because both home and school are actively involved on an ongoing basis.
So now let's look at what are those keys to establishing these connections. And it begins with all parties reaching out to each other. And we recognize that COVID in the past certainly limited your ability to reach out to your school or to your classroom teacher. and it's still maybe having some sort of impact at this point in time. As Jaime mentioned at the beginning of the year, the school or your child's teacher initiates that connection. It could be through newsletters, through the school and class websites. It could be what we refer to as sunshine calls, where they're calling with a good news event. So it's really important that when the school does reach out, that you're responding and you're consistently supporting and attending those school events. As well, it's all about having a positive attitude. And as we said, you know, COVID did have a big impact last year, but we're into a new school year and we really need to be embracing these new opportunities and to try to move on from what happened last year and to not be fixated on that and to focus on those positives that should come about during this new school year.
And the other thing that's really important to establishing these connections is for all parties involved to truly have a growth mindset. And in a nutshell, we're looking at kind of the phrase, yes, we can. That attitude really kind of summarizes, I think, the growth mindset really well. And with this growth mindset, it's important to recognize that reconnecting with schools and teachers, it can be difficult in some situations. But we need to remind ourselves that through hard work, really kind of joint effort, and really kind of this idea of working together and pulling together as a team, that these positive connections are possible and sustainable. And boy, are they ever valuable for your kids. Now, a strong connection between home and school, it tells your child that his or her learning will truly be a team effort. Now, connections help us create a culture of what we call us, rather than families versus the school. And I think it's really important to stress that everyone is involved in the child's education, and everyone is a teammate, not a competitor in this process. The school is working with home, and home is working with school. You are very much teammates. And this team is all about ensuring your child has as positive a school year as absolutely possible. Another real side benefit I have found, both as parent, teacher, and principal, when it comes to these strong connections, over time, they really do heighten the sense of accountability and responsibility for your child, as he or she quickly realizes that mom and dad and everyone at the school, they're on the same team and they're in constant communication. So it's very difficult for a child to try to play the he said, she said game where, oh, my teacher said this and mom or dad, you're saying this and the principal said this. No, with these strong connections, everyone knows there's more and more of one unified message.
And as we look back on this past year with regard to the pandemic, there certainly were a lot of changes that took place in education. You know, we saw our kids using technology more for their learning and for sharing their learning with their teacher and their classmates. When kids were in-person learning, that classroom layout probably looked different, whereas previously our kids were in groups so that they were able to collaborate and work together. But during the pandemic, we perhaps saw that they needed to be in rows for that safety and physical distancing to support everybody. You know, there are a lot of different routines with regard to movement in the hallway and yard routines. And then the big one was your access to your child's teacher and your child's school, that there wasn't that opportunity to drop in and have those face-to-face conversations in person. A lot of that was taking place virtually. And when we look at some of these changes that occurred during the pandemic, you know, some of them may become permanent moving forward. And I think it's important for us to recognize that some of these changes were actually very beneficial for everybody. So, you know, we need to embrace some of the things that are different for us and recognize that they'll be with education for the long term because of their value. However, that being said, we also have to recognize that there, were some really great practices and routines that were in place prior to the pandemic that maybe we weren't able to utilize as much through the virtual learning, et cetera, and some really great teaching pedagogy that we certainly will be seeing returning and continuing. So it's important to remember as well that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to keep those good practices moving forward, but also embrace those things that happened during the pandemic that had a positive impact.
All righty, so we are kind of 1/3 done our overall webinar this evening. This focus, of course, was on what are connections. So at this point, if there are any questions or concerns or clarifications you'd like addressed, we'd be happy to do so.
And by all means, you can add them to the chat. You can have your mic turned on and you can ask us live, or you can raise your hand. I think that's an option. And then as well, there's our email address. So feel free, if you would be more comfortable emailing a question to us, by all means, you can go that route.
Let's go to the first question. Well, Carole, as you know, in our different presentations and webinars over the past year or so, one question that kind of frequently came up was variations of the question of, well, as a parent, how can I really connect if I frankly don't like my child's teacher?
Well, that's a really great question, and something that's a skill that we need to be teaching our children as well, because we're not always going to have or be in situations where we're working with somebody that we really like. So I think it's important that as best you can, you still need to be responding in a timely manner should the teacher reach out to you, or asking those questions if you do have things that you need to have clarified.
Well, I think also having our kids get used to many different personalities and, of course, different teaching styles, and they're going to be in school a long time, and there's going to be different kind of, I guess, strengths of connection between home and school and the child and the teacher and so on. But it's important for kids to realize that people are different, but there's lots of different ways to be a very effective teacher. And I think the big thing to me is it's really important for parents to model for their kids that kind of open-mindedness that every year is a new exciting opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And if there really is a serious disconnect between yourself and your child's teacher, I think you should feel free to contact the principal or your administrator so that they can be involved in those meetings as well, to help kind of mediate that relationship and ensure that your questions and concerns are being addressed.
No, well said, Carole. If in the very small percentage of cases it kind of reaches that point, you're absolutely right. That's when the principal should be involved. All right, so moving on. Why are these connections so important? Well, to us, these connections are the absolute very essence of the home-school partnership. Now, two most important reasons for establishing and really valuing strong connections between home and school, well, they involve two biggies, those being student safety and student learning.
And when we're looking at student safety and student learning, we know that strong homeschool connection really helps to facilitate the ongoing monitoring in these two areas of concerns. And in many cases, when a safety concern or an issue, an incident arises, it certainly can be dealt with much more effectively when our children know that home and school are in regular communication and that they're on the same page. And nothing can damage that homeschool partnership more quickly then that first contact that you have with the school is over an issue or an incident that, it really gets that relationship off on the wrong foot. And that's why it's so essential that we ensure that these connections are beginning to be established at the beginning of the school year.
Well, in terms of the power of connections and student safety, let's face it, no one, none of us, and certainly none of our kids can do their absolute best at school and really focus on their work if they're feeling any anxiety in terms of physical, social, or emotional safety and well-being. And the bottom line is a safe classroom and a safe overall school environment, they obviously create a strong learning environment. Now, in terms of connections and kind of parental support of academics, it's really beneficial if parents are in basically regular communication with the classroom teacher and have a real sense of work the child may be doing in the evening or on the weekend or some kind of project. If the parent knows what the teacher's expectations are and things of that nature, then they really can have really kind of targeted assistance they can provide their child.
So when we look at these connections, through these connections that we create with our child's teacher and our child's school, it really helps to establish a feeling of mutual trust. And this trust is what is so essential when it comes to resolving issues that could arise throughout the school year. But because we know that when parents are connected to their child's teacher and to their school, they really feel that they're being heard. And also on the other side, when teachers feel connected to their parent base, they really feel supported. And when both parties are feeling this way, this is when that sense of trust between the parents and the school and the teacher really begin to take place. And I also want to point out that when we talk about this connectivity, and we've mentioned it previously, though, it really is that reciprocal relationship, has that reciprocity to it. It's not just parents to teachers or teachers to parents. It's both parties working together, because when it comes down to it, when we establish these connections and this sense of trust, it's our children who are going to be benefiting, because children feel successful and they feel content when they have this strong commitment from all involved adults.
And existing trust, it really benefits addressing issues. There's no doubt about it. And they having this, Carole was mentioning, this connectivity between home and school already in place, and to have kind of a foundation of trust, well, they're invaluable when it comes to addressing significant issues, As mentioned, if the first contact between home and school, it should never be over a negative issue or concern. Now, when an issue or concern arises, and these are particularly emotional times, like we totally get that. Well, matters are far better resolved if mutual trust is already in place. Because when there's a lack of trust, I found, thinking back with my principal hat on, that this often leads to immediate and emotional reactions by some or all parties involved. And I certainly don't mean just parents, but I mean kind of all adults involved. If there's been no prior connection between home and school, it really kind of gets those meetings off to an emotional and kind of, as Carole said, the wrong foot. And I found that emotional reactions, they tend to inflame the situation. They kind of throw the proverbial fuel on the fire, so to speak. And then what happens is the issue becomes kind of secondary, and all of a sudden things become personal and accusatory, which of course really detracts from any efforts to establish trust. But most importantly, it just does not address the issue regarding your child that you were wanting to discuss in the first place.
And we'll certainly be addressing this in much more detail in our second webinar, where we really look at that communication and how you can have these meaningful conversations with the school when maybe you don't agree or don't agree fully with what is being put in place.
Bottom line, connectivity breeds contentment. And connected parents tend to be involved parents. And involved parents tend to model lifelong learning, and they really place a high value on education. And involved parents tend to have involved students. And involved students tend to be happier and more successful at school. And they also tend to have a much richer overall school experience. Now, we totally realize the pandemic is still a very big factor, and extracurricular activities are very limited, and a lot of them are either not happening or they've gone virtual. Absolutely similar situation in Ontario, and we totally get that. But over time, of course, more extracurricular alternatives will be offered. And now and in the future, we strongly encourage you to really strongly encourage your kids to get involved outside the classroom.
And another result of the strong school or connection between parents and teachers and schools is that it does create a much more cohesive school community, which really reinforces the whole notion that learning is a team effort and that it doesn't take place in a vacuum. And when we have this cohesive school community, it often leads to multiple community partnerships. So things like having connections with the police where they can come in and present, on various topics to the students, or a variety of those community agencies that can provide those supports to that school community. And when these community connections also reinforce that whole notion of lifelong learning, because our kids are going to be seeing that learning extends far beyond the school and the classroom walls. But in addition to laying this foundation of lifelong learning, these connections also establish the school as that hub for wellness and support. And that's one thing that definitely has come out of the pandemic. And it certainly has reinforced how important mental health is and how it can impact a student's learning and a student's well-being. So by having these really strong school communities, we really are supporting all of our kids throughout their educational journey.
All right, so let's kind of summarize the key benefits of these connections. Well, certainly number one is keeping parents well informed. The bottom line is nobody likes surprises. And this regular communication really minimizes any potential surprises. And parents need a solid foundation of really back and forth regular information from the school or the teacher to be really supportive. Now, the second one is mutual trust. And we're talking about that a lot tonight because it's so important. As Carole has mentioned, it's a two-way street. And to continue that kind of analogy or metaphor of a roadway, the reality is that over any school year, there are going to be different barriers and detours and roadblocks and potholes to overcome. But if mutual trust is in place, it really helps home and school smooth over that journey. And finally, the benefits of connection include happy and involved students. And let's face it, for all of us, ultimately, the whole school experience is all about our kids.
So as we wrap up this section on why these connections are so important, if you do have any questions, feel free to add them. Sorry, maybe I'm reading the chat here. It takes me a little while, so maybe Jamie could carry on this conversation.
As Carole's glancing at the chats, I'm just going to kind of begin these kind of Q&A for this section on a common one that Carole and myself have been given numerous times over the last couple of years. And that is the idea that as a parent, when should I sit back and let my child address his or her concerns versus my direct involvement as a parent? And I think it's an important kind of growth process for your child. Certainly one big factor is the age of your child. Obviously, a 12-year-old should take a lot more initiative to speak to the teacher about a concern, et cetera, than say a 5 or 6-year-old. Number two, it depends on the concern. Certainly, if it's something kind of academic or clarification or something about the classroom dynamic or maybe the student they're sitting beside or whatever the case may be, those are conversations which a 10, 12-year-old, 14-year-old student by all means should be empowered to initiate with the teacher. If any further problems arise, great to have mom and dad kind of there for support. But those are things the child can initiate on his or her own. On the other hand, of course, more serious matters, that may affect their emotional or social or physical safety or whatever. Those types of things, of course, are not child initiated, and those are brought up by the parent.
Okay, so we do have a question here, and it kind of goes back to when we were talking about not being connected with our child's teacher, that we have that disconnect in the sense that we may not really care for the teacher. And so the question here is that, you know, if I'm not happy with my child's teacher, I'm as a parent, I'm concerned that they may not take my concerns seriously, and unless maybe I'm a little bit more aggressive with my point. So just wondering if we can speak to why an educator may not be as open to what I have to say.
Well, first off, I think it's important for parents to really realize that in terms of who your child's teacher is, in other words, generating those class lists, those are done the previous spring. So with any of your children, if you have like kind of strong preferences about next year's teacher, those should be forwarded in and discussed with the principal, say in May of the kind of present school year for next fall. Once the school year starts, I found certainly as principal that it was very rare to have a child say shift teachers, because from a logistical point of view, that generally meant that some other child had to move from the other class and back and forth. So it really affected certainly more than just your child. But also, as we were talking a few minutes ago, I think it's kind of an important lesson for your child to, and frankly, as a parent too, to kind of, and frankly, as a teacher, to work with kind of different personalities. But everybody is, once again, I think the key is to have everyone with the attitude that we're all truly in this together. And there's lots of different ways to ensure your child has a very productive school year. But once again, everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction.
But I think when it comes to the fact that I'm not feeling like my child's teacher is taking my concerns seriously, I think that's a time where we can request to have a co-meeting with your child's teacher, administration, and yourselves, and really have that opportunity to outline what your concerns are. And we'll certainly talk more about this in the next webinar, but where, you know, you're restating what the response is back to you, but when you leave the meeting, I think you leave the meeting knowing and be specific and ask that you want to know, you know, what is going to take place following our discussion, and have that clearly outlined so that everybody is on the same page. And restating what you're hearing really can help to reinforce that those things are going to be put in place. So I really, you know, I know Jamie's wanting to jump in here as well, but we are kind of on a bit of a time crunch. And I do have another question here. So, so I think it would be important that we address this in much more detail, as we will in the next webinar.
And I was just going to say, I think now as a parent is an excellent time. If you feel there's a serious disconnect, now is the time to address it. As in our school system, the kids are just getting their interim or progress report cards in another week or so. And if you have major concerns, let's get them addressed now, as Carole was mentioning, rather than waiting later in the year.
Okay, and there is one here which is more curriculum related, where some of the antagonism, I'm going to say, based on this, and please, I apologize if I'm not wording that correctly, and that's not what you meant, is more curriculum driven, where parents are aggressively questioning some of those curriculum directives and initiatives around kind of gender tolerance and along the social studies piece and critical race theory.
Well, I think it's important to just kind of reiterate that.
And sorry, that's more at a high school level.
Right, but just kind of reiterate, and I know we're all well aware of it, schools, of course, do not generate curriculum. They teach curriculum. So when it comes to like a real curriculum question, that's a discussion more so at a district meeting or whatever the case may be. But that's not kind of really a school level question. The school's job is to ensure that all of the kids in the appropriate grade level receive that grade level curriculum.
And then, the first time I'm working with a child's teacher is another question, or my child's teacher, how do I know if they're connected or not connected? And I really think that piece evolves over time, that maybe you're kind of questioning it at the get-go, but I really think making sure that everybody's on the same page following a meeting where we know this is the direction we're going to go will help to move the relationship forward, but also make you aware, okay, this is what we've agreed upon, and this is the time frame we've agreed upon. So if things aren't happening within that time frame, going back and having that reminder to the teacher that, this is what we agreed with. And as I say, we'll certainly discuss this much more in more detail moving on. So I think, unfortunately, that we do have another question, but I think predominantly this is a parent group that we're addressing right now. And I think we do need to move on just to respect everybody's time. So let's look at now, how do we go about establishing these connections? And it really starts by, as parents, us being informed about what's happening in our child's school and what our child is doing at school. So if your child is using the agenda, that's a great way to make sure that you're reading it on a day-to-day basis so that you're aware of those things that are happening and what are the academic and activities happening at the school. A lot of our schools and teachers have their own websites, so that's a great place to be going on a regular basis. Up here in Canada and in Ontario, I know a lot of our schools use this Remind app, which sends reminders out to parents about upcoming events. And if your schools or your areas are using something similar, make sure that you've downloaded that so you're getting those reminders as well. When the school does reach out to us, making sure that we prioritize and value these communication opportunities. And it doesn't mean that, the minute they phone that we've got to stop what we're doing or immediately address a note or a communication through the agenda that comes home, but just making sure that we get to it in that timely manner. It's also all about really ensuring that your child is completing their schoolwork responsibilities. And when we refer to that, we're not talking about you doing your child's work, but just being there as that support. If they have a question, you're there to help support them in finding the answer, not necessarily giving them the answer, but, together, how can we go about finding this answer? It's also about providing them with the necessary materials and having that quiet place where they can complete any schoolwork. Because really, this homeschool connection is just so essential, because the more that you're aware of what's going on at school, the more you are aware of what the teacher's expectations are.
Another biggie is to ensure as parents that we're always supporting school functions. And we realize, of course, that with the pandemic still certainly very much in play, that functions have changed and or are more limited. We totally get that. But especially as things kind of get more and more back to quote normal over the next few months and year, encourage your child once again to get involved in extracurriculars. And just a couple of other things I think it's really important to kind of stress is, as parents, make sure that we're supporting everything they do at school. Obviously, academics are kind of number one, but anything that they're involved in, including academics, but don't be a parent who's only going for things that say interest the parent. I have found throughout my career some really awesome parents who very openly admitted they only went to things that kind of interested them, like say their kid's volleyball game, and yet they wouldn't go to curriculum night. And then ask yourself, well, what kind of message is that sending my child? And then also in terms of any kind of larger school events or concerts or things like that, I know when I was principal, I used to always please ask the audience at the very beginning to please stay for the duration rather than simply waiting till your child's class performs and then leaving. Because once again, what message is that sending to your child? Like, we need to be a respectful, cohesive unit, and that means staying for the duration.
So as we've kind of talked a bit about, we're not always going to agree with everything that happens at school or with some decisions with your child's teacher. But I think it's really important that in general, we're always speaking well of the school and your child's teacher, because you never know when your child might be listening. And if a concern does arise, definitely you need to talk about it with your partner or with your support group, whoever that might be. But make sure that, it's after your child has gone to bed or in that private location, or perhaps, during those adult-only meetings with the school. And then when you leave those meetings, remembering that what has been discussed is really confidential. It's not something that we're going to share with the neighbors or parents at the bus stop. Certainly have those conversations with your partner and your support network, but remember that whole confidentiality piece, and it's not information to be shared freely.
And it's so important as parents to recognize and respect all the school routines and protocols. And no question, Carole and myself have been parents of school-age kids, and we've certainly worked in schools for decades. And we recognize that any given parent, any given child is not going to like a certain rule, or maybe quite a few rules. But keep in mind, all of the rules at a school are for the common good and the safety of all. The bottom line is, parents and educators alike, we both very much live a fishbowl existence. And by that, I mean, of course, that your child's or students, in the teacher's case, eyes and ears are always upon you. So therefore, I think it's always really important to consider what you do, what you say, and maybe most importantly of all, how you say it.
Sorry. I was looking over here. I haven't done the Q&A part before, and I just realized we had someone, so I do apologize for that. So moving forward, as we're establishing these strong, sustainable commitments and connections and relationships with our schools and our teachers, we have to remember that it really is a slow and steady pace, that it will take time to establish those relationships and that sense of trust with your child's teacher, but it's going to happen over time. So, but it generally starts with your child's experience with the teacher or with the school. So we really encourage you to take those regular opportunities to talk with your child about their school day. And one thing that Jamie and I found with our sons when they were younger, a great opportunity was when we were driving in the car with just one of them. And it really provided a non-threatening opportunity to just talk about their school day and the things that are going well and where they might be having challenges. Because at those times, it's not that direct eye contact they're seeing and having, and it really does facilitate a much more open and genuine conversation with your child. So certainly take advantage of those lovely drives to various activities that they might be engaging in.
Now, in terms of establishing and cultivating trust, I love this quote from Barbara M. White, who was both in the political realm and a lifelong educator. And she said, building trust is a process. It's not a one-off. It's so true. It's a process, and trust results from consistent and predictable interactions over time. So that's where we're talking about this reciprocity and this constant kind of, it's almost like a loop of trust back and forth between home and school. Now, in my career as a principal, I certainly noticed that parents and students alike, over time, when this mutual trust was in place, they learned to accept and respect decisions that I had made which they freely admit they didn't necessarily agree with. However, when that trust is there, they see the decision was based hopefully on integrity. It was the whole process was transparent, so they can more than live with it without liking it. Now, the foundation of trust between parent and school is laid, I strongly believe, when the school and or the teacher, so the principal and any given teacher, is seen by families as being consistent, fair, and transparent in its decision-making, with absolutely no whiff or no scent of any kind of favoritism or bias. Now, I just want to stress, parents, however, that this also works both ways, that this trust is really kind of established and really kind of cultivated and deepened when parents come to school or have phone calls, whatever the case may be. I realize coming to school now is extremely limited, but when you get back to coming to school for meetings or whatever, it's so important for parents to also not have any kind of biasy or hidden agenda that they're kind of withholding as they come into the office or the classroom. So we need transparency from both ends, from all parties, because any kind of hidden agenda just erodes trust, and it really significantly damages this whole connectivity process. And so I think it's really important to remember that nothing positive, I should say, comes from parents coming to school with hidden agendas.
And when we do have issues and concerns arising throughout the school year, we need to recognize that there are different perspectives and different lenses that people are seeing the situation through. As parents, of course, you see that the situation through your child's lens. And whereas when we look at teachers and administrators, they have to have a much broader view on the situation because they have to take into consideration all parties who are in the school building. But as this trust that we've been talking about continues to build between the home and the school, I think as parents, we're able to see situations through a much broader lens. And then over time, really the trust helps to gradually kind of create that one common lens through which everybody can see that same issue.
All right, now we're really looking at a really important area. And I want to stress that Carole and myself do not have the universal magic answer, but it's just something that we all have to really keep in mind. And that is balancing involvement, which of course, parental involvement, as we mentioned the last hour, is a huge plus, versus parental interference, which of course is very much a negative. And there's often kind of a fine line between the two. Now, a big part of building sustainable trust is, frankly, for all parties involved to know their role. So as parents, what are my parameters, my child, and certainly the teacher and the principal and so on. Now, we absolutely get it that as parents, you should be and always will be your child's strongest advocate and loudest voice. For years, for our two boys, that's exactly the role Carole and I assumed. And we expect that of parents. That's a parent's job. And schools and everyone involved in the school gets that and certainly respects that. But a key part of this advocate's role is to recognize, respect, and support those classroom and school decisions, which are frankly not open for discussion. For example, we've already talked about class lists a bit and how you decide which class your child is in. Or things like timetables, like what time of the day my child takes math or whatever the case may be. Those are all done by the school. What I call curriculum coverage. As principal, I've had conversations with parents over the years and tried to reiterate that curriculum is not a buffet table. Families don't pick and choose what they like to be taught. There's a standard curriculum for all students in a given grade. And there is very rare, it does happen, but it's very rare that a child would be exempt from a certain subject. And things, of course, like the logistics of the building. How is the school going to function? Yard duty schedules, hall routines, entry and exit plans. If your school has busing, like a drop off kiss and ride, all that kind of stuff, that's laid out and done by the school. And I think as parents, we're all kind of well aware of what I've just talked about, and we're pretty good with that. But the big but becomes, of course, when it comes to student discipline policies. And of course, if your child is involved in an issue, particularly a significant issue, obviously, once again, that can get very stressful for parents and kids alike, and we totally get that. But I think it's important that when you remember, when you're talking with the teacher and or the principal, you're there to discuss your child and only your child, and you're not there to discuss any other kids potentially involved.
So as we wrap up this final section on what are those keys for making those strong connections, again, it comes down to enthusiastically supporting things that are happening at the school, and recognizing that this strong homeschool partnership is really in your child's best interest, not only this year, but every school year. It's important to remember that we need to appreciate those multiple lenses and recognize that there's different perspectives to every situation. And that when we're engaging in meetings with the school and with the teacher, we need to keep that open mind. You are the strong advocate for your child, but being that strong advocate, you have to be willing to openly listen and discuss issues. And again, we'll address this much more detail in our next webinar.
And once again, it's really important to recognize the different roles we all play. But once again, we're playing different roles on the same team. And I think that's a really important distinction. And as once again, balancing passionate advocacy versus potential interference, and where that kind of line is, and recognizing issues, once again, that are really and never will be open for discussion.
And so now, with final opportunity to ask any questions that you may have at this point in time. I also just wanted to mention that in the chat, there is the link for where you can, I think, get the webinar if you want to share with maybe some other parents that weren't able to attend. So as we wrap up, we encourage you to check out our webinar, and it's available on a variety of different platforms. Also, feel free to go to our website and check that out. And by all means, if you have any questions moving forward, please feel free to email us them as well.
And as mentioned, tonight was the first of a three-part webinar series under our Returning to and Learning umbrella. And we will hopefully see you again on January 18th, when, as Carole mentioned, we'll look specifically at the engaging in communication. And we'll wrap things up with our third webinar on March 16th, bringing it all together, working as a team for the common good of our child with embracing collaboration.
And once again, we want to thank you for participating. Thank West Orange Public Schools for giving us this opportunity, and as well for Teacher Coach for our ongoing collaboration.
Thank you, Carole and Jaime. Just wanted to bring just a touch of closure to the session. Thank everyone for attending. We look forward to continuing to learn with you. And of course, this is an ongoing process and journey, not only for you as parents, but also for us as a school district. I hope that over the course of the 2+ years I've been here, that it has been clear that we are focused on continuing to get better, to be reflective about our own practice, and to collaborate to the greatest extent possible with our families for the greater good of our kids and the children. So thank you. Have a restful evening, and we'll see you on the 18th.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you all very much.